Morning, everyone. Welcome to the NALA Plain English webinar on leading plain English in your organization. You're all very welcome. I'm Sean from the National Adult Literacy Agency. Delighted to see so many people here this morning. We have, oh my God, it's rapidly going up, folks. We have like 260 people registered, and we have kind of 70, 80 people in the here now. So thank you so much. Delighted to be joined by my colleague Derv. Derv Ryan is here. That's great. Derv, do you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone. Good to see so many of you here.
And I'd like to be joined by Louise Stait from Pushing the Pen in the UK. So Louise is going to speak about the 7 principles of implementing plain language in your organization, your public sector organization, but it could apply to lots of different organizations. And then we have Leanne Caufield from Coimisiún Meán. I've been practicing that pronunciation all week, Coimisiún Meán, and formerly the Law Reform Commission. And Leanne and I are going to have a conversation about plain language and her experience because she's such a leader in the field. Yeah. So that's for today, folks. It's always great at webinars and things like this to get to know each other a little bit. So maybe Derv, if you share the slides for us there, please, that'd be great. Lovely. So folks, we're going to try to make it as interactive as possible this morning. So Derv, if you go to the next slide for me, please. Just so you know, folks, the webinar will be recorded. So that's the plan for this morning. We're going to make it available on YouTube. So it's always great to get to know where people are from. So in the chat, folks, if you feel like introducing yourself in the chat, that would be good. So tell us like, hi, I'm Sean. I work in NALA. I do this in NALA, and I'd like to learn this about plain English or plain language. Sometimes I'll say plain English, folks. Sometimes I'll say plain language. It's the same thing, depending on what language you're using. So just if you fancy, folks, just introduce yourselves in the chat. That would be really wonderful. And I'm just going to chat for a few more minutes while we wait for more people to arrive. So just feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. That would be good. Lovely. So that you'll see folks on the slide that we have people from ETBs. I put LOETB there because I'm a leash man myself now. And I think it's such a great name, isn't it? LOETB. It's like Hello ETB. I think that'd be a really great tagline for ETBs. And we've local authorities here. I put Monaghan there because, everyone knows Monaghan. People from Justice, probation service. People from, sports partnerships, getting people involved all across the country. I think sport is one of the great ways for like equality and diversity and inclusivity in Ireland. So great to have people there. People from the private sector, like Aer Lingus. People from Citizens Information, with Aer Lingus the private sector. Maybe I should, public and private, I suppose. Citizens Information, MABs, NGOs doing great work like Food Clouds, people from government departments, people from Crosscare, the HSC, the Arts Council, volunteers, and then like the Adoption Authority of Ireland. The email address said the AAI, which could have been like the Architecture Association of Ireland, but I thought it might be the Adoption Authority. So there we go. Yeah, so it's great to see so many people here, folks, all the different organizations. Yeah, lovely. Many people we're up to. We're up to 111. So if you go to the next slide for me, please. Yeah, so folks, I give a lot of training sessions in my role in NALA as a plain English editor. And what I do like is when we have friendly faces, because when you present to the darkness, it can be very hard to actually present. So I'd like if 10 volunteers who would like to have their camera turned on. It's a bit like a political rally. At the back you're kind of that, but it's not that. It's just kind of having people who would like to, be part of the session and maybe want to ask questions. So yeah, so I'm just gonna the people who say yes to camera. I'm gonna like turn on a couple of them if that is okay. So thanks for rolling along with us, folks. So if you do a few and I do a few, that might be helpful. It's a bit tricky because you have to go into chat and then you have to go to person's name. That's great. So while we're doing that, folks, I will maybe just get started. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Louise Stait of Pushing the Pen. And I first came across Louise when Louise was giving a presentation at another webinar. I thought she was such an impassioned speaker and had a lot of experience in different ways. So I hope we're going to learn a lot. So maybe if we scroll down to the next slide and the next one. So yeah, that's Leanne. So Leanne, and the next one. And at the end, folks, we're gonna have questions and answers at the end. So yeah, I'm gonna hand over to Louise, and Yeah, and we're going to do the slides for Louise. So thanks for coming along, folks. I'm going to hand over to Louise.
Thanks, Sean, and thank you. Very nice to meet with you all today. So when it comes to plain language, I wear two different hats. And the first hat, which I'm not wearing today to speak to you, is that I work within the public sector in England and I work in governance. So a really important part of my role and my team's role is to work with people around the organisation to make sure that they write better committee papers, better policies, that kind of thing. And I'm really passionate about that and have been for a long time. And then the second hat I wear, which I am wearing today to speak to you, is that about a year ago, I started to do some blogging and some stuff on LinkedIn around this topic of promoting better writing within a public sector organisation. And the reason for that is because I was becoming so passionate and so excited by the work I was doing in my day job. And there was this sense of wanting to get outside my organization, meet other people, find out what's the best practice going on, what are people doing, what can I learn, what can I share. So it's been a really good journey. And as Sean said, Sean was actually one of the first people I met on this sort of blogging adventure, which has been great. So that's how I've ended up talking to you today. So my presentation is about how to embed plain language within the organisation. So I think the later webinars in this series are more about the nuts and bolts and things like writing, good leaflets in plain language. But the talk today is really about the culture change thing and how you might start to embed plain language as something that's very real within your organisation. And as I said, my interest is really the corporate documents, so the committee papers and the risk registers and things like that. And I know some of you are more into the public facing side of plain language, so the leaflets and the web pages, and some of you indeed are from the private sector. But I think, or I hope you'll find that these 7 principles should apply across the board. So Derva, if you can find us the next slide. And the next one. Thank you. Right, so the first principle is value the art of public sector administration. And I wanted to have this as the founding principle because I think these days it feels like it's quite popular to have a pop of public sector administrators. So there's this stereotype that we're these kind of bloated, lazy people, working at home, sitting on our pelotons, writing terrible documents that nobody wants to read and sucking up money that should be spent on ambulances and things like that. Okay, but I've worked in the public sector pretty much all my adult life, and that stereotype doesn't reflect my own experience, which is of working with really good people who are administrators and really trying to do their best for the general public. So this is why I wanted this to be the founding principle, is that what we do is important. It can give a backbone and support to the important work that our frontline colleagues do. It's difficult to do well as well, public sector administration. So we need to really honour that, and try to do the best that we can in this important work. So principle 2, Deborah, is it okay to have principle 2 up? Focus on solutions and not symptoms. So sometimes when you're very good at writing, it can be easy to slip into being a bit judgmental because there's people in your organisation that aren't going to get it and are never going to get it. But they've got other skills instead. And it can be quite easy to get into a kind of negative mindset where you're complaining, why do people use so much jargon? Why do people write such long papers? Why can't they do it? And it's very easy to get into that. But on the next slide, Derva, there's a lovely quote here from Daniel Priestley. And what he says here, if you look the second paragraph down, he says, spotting symptoms isn't actually very clever. Being able to figure out how to address the true causes is clever. So if this presentation was a bit longer, I'd be talking to you about systems thinking, which is really fundamental to all this kind of culture change work. But suffice to say, just for this very quick presentation, systems thinking is thinking about things holistically and really getting under the skin and thinking about all the interdependencies. And that's really where we want to be if we want to embed plain language in the organisation. Okay, next slide, please. So principle 3, grow your own. So again, this is another one close to my heart. So sometimes there can be this assumption that nobody in the organisation has got the skills and we're going to have to go outside and source something else. Okay, but I'd really challenge that sometimes. And the larger your organisation is, the more likely it is that you have got people with some really good skills in your organisation. And what these people would need to make a difference, they would need the really good writing skills, obviously, that's a given. They also need the ability to coach and teach others. But they also need this kind of leadership ability and the ability to mobilize change and make things happen in the organization. And that's something that can be taught if people don't already have it. And the fourth thing that these people would need would be the time and the permission and the headspace to do some of this work. So what can happen is you can have people within the organization who are very, very capable with the plain language, but perhaps they don't have time because of their day job, or it's not part of their role. So if you are going to bring in somebody from the outside, perhaps think about how you use them. So at one end of the scale, you can get an expert to come in and rewrite all your policies in plain language. And that's great if you've got a compliance box to tick. But when that person's gone, you're left with nothing. You've still got nobody in the organization who can do that work themselves. So there are organizations, and I believe NALA is one of them, which will come in and work with you much more holistically, and really sort of think about embedding things. And I'd suggest it might be helpful if when people come in, perhaps if they put more effort into working with your internal champions and the people who'll be able to take it forward in the future, so that when they go, you've got something sustainable. Okay, principle 4. So organic over off the shelf. So something like implementing plain language in your organization, it is really complex, and it's not something that you can just decide how you're going to do it and then put it in the staff newsletter and people will start doing it. And the interesting thing about these kind of complex projects is that a solution might work really well in one organization and completely fail in another organization. And it's because of the culture, and it's because of the soil in which things are received. So an important principle in healthcare improvement is this whole body of knowledge called quality improvement. And it's a recognized body of methodology. I can give more links to Sean after this call if anybody's interested. But the whole methodology is about enabling and helping the people closest to the problem to solve the problem. So you work with the people who can't write well, and you work out, why is this? What's the barriers in place, and how can you help them? And another really core principle of quality improvement is this idea of rapid testing. So you look into the problem, you find what a good solution would be, but what you don't do then is roll out that solution to the whole organization, because you have no idea how that's going to land. So you do the rapid testing. So you think of your hypothesis. Okay, if I do this, then this might happen. If I set up, lunchtime surgeries to look at people's committee papers, it might help people. And then you test it really fast and you see how it goes with a small group of people. And if it fails, you haven't lost much, so you can move on. But if it succeeds, you can build on that and do a bit more. And in this way, over time, what you're going to get is a bespoke, really organic solution that is perfectly tailored to your organization. It's built by your own people, and it's going to work, and it's going to be sustainable. Okay, so principle 5. A yin-yang approach. Okay, so again, I think sometimes when we talk about plain language, we can sometimes fall into this way of thinking that it's all about the soft side of things. It's working with people, it's talking to them, it's explaining why it's important, it's giving them training sessions on how to do it. Okay, and all that stuff's important. But there is a school of thought that actually those sort of interventions are quite weak, and they don't make that much difference. And there's this school of thought that actually the hard approaches are much more effective. And when I say hard, I don't mean shouting at people or punishing them if they get it wrong. Hard approaches in this context is about the processes you've got in place. So it's about making sure your processes are set up in such a way that people cannot fail. And it's this idea of forcing functions. So a forcing function is, for example, if you're working on your computer and you go to close the document, you'll get a little pop-up box and it will say, do you want to save this document before you close it? And you'll click yes. So that's the forcing function. And because what that means is that you can't accidentally close the document and lose all of your changes. So you can't get that wrong. Okay, so this principle is used a lot in healthcare improvement, but it can be applied also to plain language. So an obvious example is templates. So templates can really be your friend here for making people write in a better way. And if you're struggling with it, and if you're frustrated because people are filling in a certain box and they're writing garbage and you don't like it, look at that, maybe give them a drop-down box so that they can choose the options from that. And this is a forcing function. One of my personal is something I've done with our risk management database. So if you've got something like that, which larger organizations will have, I've managed to get someone to get into the back end of it and reduce all the text boxes to 250 characters, including words, including spaces. So in terms of getting people to write their risk descriptions in a nice succinct format, that has been the single most effective thing I've done, more than any training, more than any talking to people and sort of pleading with them to get it right. It's just cut off the word limits. Okay, so that's why I said a yin yang approach, to try and get the hard and the soft measures and a combination of both to take this forward. Okay.
I'm just going to jump in for one sec, Louise.
Yeah.
Maybe so there's one or two people who can't see the slide. It's stuck on slide one. So if we just stop sharing and then reshare, we'll see if that fixes it.
Okay.
And if it doesn't, we'll have to carry on.
They've only been images, and for people
Yeah.
who can't see it, so there's been no words on them.
Lovely. So, folks, yeah, just while I'm popping in, if you have any thoughts of what Louise is saying, just put it in the chat. It's always great to hear reflections and things like that. And I love that idea of forced functions. So, yeah, any things in the chat is always welcome. Back to Louise. Sorry.
Thanks, Sean. And so, principle 6. So principle 6, so obviously all of this is just my view and you might well have different views, but I think you should prioritize excitement over compliance on work like this. And this is about values and, you know, how people in the public sector think and work. And in my experience, if you lecture people and say, oh, you know, this isn't very good, you're letting the public down, you know, you need to write plain language because that's how you show you care, that's going to maybe fall on deaf ears because people already care about the public. They don't want to be lectured in that way, and they're doing their best, and maybe they can't write any better than what they're doing. And again, if you talk about compliance, that doesn't get you much of a good response. So saying things like, you need to write this clearly because, you know, the auditors might pick it up and not be happy, or the regulator might not be happy, that doesn't tend to really sort of get people going when they're public servants, because they're very much more public focused. So I find that prioritizing excitement is the way to do it. And a really good entry into this, if Derva, you can find us the next slide. So I know Sean's seen this model before, and maybe some of the rest of you have, but this is my favorite model for organizational change and embedding plain language. So this graph shows you the normal distribution. It shows you how people like a general population think about change and feel about change. So what you can see from this diagram is that most people don't like change and they don't want it and they don't want to know. So you've got the people right at the right-hand side, the laggards, they hate the change and they're going to resist it, whatever happens. Then you've got the late majority, again, pretty resistant. The early majority, they will go along with the change, but only when they can see that other people are doing it. Then the early adopters and the innovators right on the left-hand side. Okay, so when you think you've got all these different types of people in the organization, this is why it's a mistake to get an initiative like plain language and just kind of roll it out to the whole organization. So, you know, put it in your newsletter, have a staff briefing session, tell people they've got to do this stuff. That's a really difficult way to implement a culture change. However, if you just target on that left-hand side group of people, your innovators, it's going to be much more organic, much more effective, and it's fun. It's really fun to work with that group of people. So a way that I've found helpful in this is, for example, the first time I ever offered a plain language training course at work, I didn't offer it to the whole organization. I put it in the newsletter as a pilot and said, I'd like to offer this pilot. I need a couple of interested volunteers to help me develop it and get involved. And the people come flocking, the sort of innovative people. And what you find is they'll come to you like bees to honey, really, if they think it's something exciting and new and they can be in on it from the start. And then once they start to adopt this and model it, then you'll find that the early adopters will start to see what the innovators are doing and they'll start to pick it up. And then you get this kind of ripple effect throughout the organization. Okay, so next slide, please, Deva. And principle 7, come at it from all angles. So as I said to you, I've been looking at a lot of plain language blogs and websites and webinars and stuff over the last year. And I keep hearing this interesting debate about, should you do it top down or should you do it bottom up? Okay, so it's a good question. And I think my personal view is top down is very, very important, but you can do a lot without it if you can't get it. Bottom up, I think, is essential. But my preferred place at the moment is middle outwards, I guess. So my thinking at the moment is that middle managers are really where it's at, and that's the people with all the power to make the change. But principle 7 is come at it from all angles. Just go where there's an open door. So if you can't get your exec to support you, just get one exec to be your champion. You know, if you can't get the rest of the organization to support you, just find your change agents and just work with anyone who'll work with you and come at it from all angles. Okay, so So next slide is really just to say thank you for listening. So thank you, that was enjoyable. I've just put up a link to where I'm active on LinkedIn, and I've got an emerging website as well, which I'm trying to make into a kind of hub for all things about organizational change and plain language. And so that's it really. And then the next slide is just the credits for the pictures that we've used.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Louise. Maybe there, you can rest on the previous slide. Great. So, folks, we might pause for just a few minutes now, and if anyone has any questions for Louise, I know I learned so much from Louise each time I speak to her. So, if you want to put a question in the chat, and I do love to hear people's voices, folks. So, if you feel comfortable, I might unmute you, or I might just read the question, whichever you feel comfortable with. So, if anyone has any questions or reflections, do put it in the chat. I might just get us started, and then we'll go to Leanne in a few minutes. So, forced functions, Louise. It sounds like such a drastic thing, but if you think about it, like it's just about giving people structure and giving people like the way, kind of pathfinding and wayfinding. And what was the effects of that kind of cutting down the word count? What was the effect for your people, or the document
Well,
or the?
people liked it. I actually thought people would resist it. People liked it, and they found it really helpful. So, and
Yeah,
they kind of haven't got a choice, because once the database has been amended, you actually can't do anything different. So,
yeah, really, really interesting. And then, yeah. So that's a really interesting question. That might be one for Leanne as well. As Leanne is Assistant Director of Research. But yeah, I'll throw it to Louise. So Louise, do you have any insights into how to approach research documents?
well, as you say, Leanne's the expert in this. What's the question here? Is it in
Yeah,
how to write an academic paper? Is that the question?
I might see if I can unmute Pamela, or we might come back to that, Pamela. We might speak to Leanne and hear from Leanne, and then we might come back to that. Is that fair? And then we'll bring Louise in. So I think that Leanne will have a lot to say about that. Is that okay with you, Louise?
Of course, yeah.
Grand. We'll pause that, Pamela, for a second. Um, yeah. Okay. So, folks, any thoughts? Do put them in the chat. But we might move on to Leanne. So, delighted to have Leanne here. We might stop sharing the slides if that's okay. Oh, we have the picture of Leanne there. There's Leanne. Yeah. So the idea of this, folks, is we had a really fantastic presentation from Louise, and yeah, we want to have a conversation. So it's kind of just a way to get us Leanne's knowledge and experience. So I want to share that with us. Um, so yeah, so Leanne, you're working with Coimisiún as Assistant Director of Research, and before that, you were working as similar job in the Law Reform Commission, and you've done so much work in plain language over the years. And I've worked with you a little bit. More, my colleague Claire works more closely with you. Some people on the call probably know Claire Reardon, one of the strongest editors and directors of plain English projects, across Ireland for 20 years. Um, so I just think I always think of you as a crusader, Leanne, if that's not too drastic, but you kind of really do try to put things for the Law Reform Commission into plain language on topics like compensating victims of crime, more recent one about adult safeguarding. So just as an opening question, like how would you describe your philosophy for leading those research projects and communicating with the public?
Yeah, I think just for leading those kind of research projects, and in particular, it's about consulting with the public, and making sure that their voice and views are heard, and that they can contribute on an equal basis to other people. And when you're dealing with services or organisations that provide such a public service, it's so important that um, the work that you're doing is actually evidence based, and that it can be reached by the people you're trying to reach. So I think the philosophy is really putting yourself in those people's shoes. I see people in the chat were saying, I've never written in this kind of style before, and I don't like, I wouldn't know how to go about it, but it can be difficult at first, but it's just thinking, who are the audience? What's their level of knowledge on social welfare benefits, or money advice and budgeting, or healthcare services? How much are they likely to know about this? And if they're likely to know very little, then we need to make sure that we're getting the information across as simply as possible. using very short sentences, not using complex jargon. And think about it, sometimes you might need to explain to your parents or your grandparents what your job is. And think about it like that. If you were explaining this to someone in your family who maybe doesn't understand what your job is, or something like that, what kind of language would you use? And trying to really put yourself in the shoes of the audience and tailoring what you're writing to those people and their level of knowledge. And we can all imagine that there's things we don't know about. If someone was talking to me about mechanical engineering, you know, I'd really appreciate if it was broken down and not too much jargon is used. So we can all be in that situation ourselves. I think it's about respect and seeking to connect with the people who you are targeting the service at, so that they can really meaningfully understand your service and engage, and recognizing that knowledge is power. And if they can understand your information or your pamphlet or your website, that's going to allow them to access services and to access their rights. So it's really about those principles that Louise mentioned as well, but about knowledge, empowerment, people's rights, access to services, and just putting yourself in the shoes of the people you are trying to reach.
Thanks, Leanne. That's so eloquently said. In my job, folks, in the plain English service in NALA, I have this kind of really weird experience sometimes where I'm working on a document, say for the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions, and it's about like going to court as a witness. And I kind of, I try to do what you said, Leanne, which is kind of, put myself in the shoes. And then it comes down like a year or two later, and I'm like, oh, where do I go for guidance? Oh, the thing you helped to edit, Sean, you're reading that. And it's happened like 3 or 4 times in my life. And you really just see it from a completely different experience, so that's really, so as much as you can, folks. And I really do echo the point about like user testing and getting insight from people with like experience, and we all experience services, so that's good. But then like you've kind of probably faced a lot of challenges in your career, Leanne. So like, what are some of the challenges you faced, and any solutions you had for overcoming them?
Yeah, so one of the first challenges, and Louise mentioned it as well, is buy-in and changing minds. And I could talk a lot about that, so I might talk about that separately, but just to say that is one of the main challenges. And a separate challenge then is, someone mentioned research in the chat, but lawyers in particular, and trying to persuade lawyers to write more simply, and undoing habits that might have been built across decades, across a career. And those habits arise because people adopt the writing style of the documents they read while they were studying. So they've read academic articles, they've read judgments, and they think that's how they should write to be a good lawyer. They think, using certain phrasing and writing styles means they're, a great lawyer, and they're really just reflecting the styles that they've been exposed to. And then I think a third challenge is writing in plain language without losing too much nuance. And that can arise in all sectors, but I think particularly in legal writing, you might want to say something like, so you might be referring to, example, a term that's used in the Mental Health Act 2001, approved centres. But it's not correct to say all places where people receive treatment for mental health issues, because approved centres under the legislation means something very particular. So it's about trying to convey meaning without losing nuance, and that can sometimes be very difficult. But with practice, it is possible. And explaining legal terms and things like proportionate, when there is a legal test, a proportionality test, and how do you explain that in a plain language way without losing accuracy or nuance. And then I think a fourth challenge is just getting people to put themselves in other people's shoes. Because I think that can be really hard. Some people maybe don't know people with low literacy levels. They might have come from an educated family, from family with equal ability and opportunities, and they might just maybe they don't know very many people from different backgrounds, and they just really are used to dealing with people who have the same level of knowledge of their sector. And getting people to change those habits can be really difficult. But in terms of, I suppose, the buy-in point, more particularly in changing minds, as Louise said, sometimes the compliance approach isn't as successful. Sometimes it is. It just depends who you're trying to convince. But I think, firstly, on trying to generate buy-in, if you can, as Louise said, generate that excitement, if you can generate that passion and identify people who think are going to believe in the cause with you, I think that can be really impactful if you can have some other champions in the organisation. By highlighting how it will improve your work, how it will ensure your work reaches more people, reaches the people it's aimed at, how it might, mean that you get more inputs from the public and you might get more responses to your consultation, your leaflets might reach more people. But it's also outlining that moral duty, and it's in the public interest, it's the right thing to do. But for all those on the call in public sector bodies, it can also be useful, and it does kind of almost speak to the compliance point, but there is a public sector duty in the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission Act 2014 in Ireland, section 42. And if you are in a public body, plain English is really part of that public sector duty to vindicate the rights of people. And it's pointing to that as well, and especially if you're working in bodies like MABs or Citizens Information or a government department that might be engaging with people who have disabilities, or that might be engaging with children and young people, and pointing to the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities and to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and the right of the child to be heard, and the need to ensure that documents are accessible to people to comply with the public sector duty, to comply with international law obligations like the UN conventions. And then also, I think it can be useful as well to refer to the guidance of the Department of Public Expenditure and National Development Plan Delivery and Reform, and their communications toolkits for the public sector, and really highlighting these are the norms that have been set for us as public sector bodies. And I think sometimes at a more senior level, when you're trying to get buy-in or budget approval, when you've already built your guiding coalition of champions and generated excitement and passion, that those kind of things are what will get maybe budgetary sign-off or something at a more senior level. Those compliance aspects, the norm that these are public sector norms, that these are things that have been set. And then I think finally on the buy-in point is about, unfortunately, sometimes taking a more cynical approach in terms of reputation and business case, that this is in the business, plain language can be in the business interests. You'll reach more service users if you're a public body or a non-government organisation, reach more customers if you're a private sector body. It can generate, people are engaging more with the body. It can mean that your body has a more positive reputation. It can attract, for example, if a NALA mark is on your publications, the NALA mark is really well respected. It can generate positive press. For example, when I worked in the Law Reform Commission, we published a plain English version of a consultation paper, and the plain English version itself generated a whole article in the Irish Times separate to the actual consultation paper. And I think while Louise's point around excitement and passion is so important and fundamental, sometimes when it comes to business cases and sign off, outlining those other points around reputation, business interests, compliance, the public sector duty, the moral duty, they can all feed into it too. And depending on the organisation and what kind of approval or sign off you're trying to get, there can be a bigger picture from buy-in which is made up of all of those elements.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think I really agree with what you said there, Leanne. So, like, people might be motivated by different things, So senior managers and CEOs might be motivated. Look, everyone should be motivated by the public sector duty, but that can be that requires leadership to make sure it's put in place. And then when you're getting people to say we have lots of documents and we want to put them in plain language, we want to put them on a website and we're going to plain English them. You can make that in a way like play, like do things through play or do things through. And maybe I've drank my own Kool-Aid, folks, but like there is something very satisfying when you're taking something that's very, very difficult and putting it into a plain language version, and you see the difference and the clarity it achieves. That can be good. And we did a training session there with a client yesterday, and I don't think a training session's ever gone so well. And we were just getting the team to look at letters they were sending about a process, or emails they were sending about a process, and I left them alone for like 20-25 minutes to kind of rewrite them, and they came back with like one of the best kind of rewrites or edits, and they did it together as a team, and it was like it felt like a really bad episode of The Crystal Maze, you know, where I was popping in saying, how you getting on? How you doing? But at the same time, it was like they really got through the work, and I was really, and like I'd done a suggested edit, and their edit was much better because they understood the process, they understood what they were doing. So I think that's, I just wanted to share that, and I wanted to wedge that in. That's the little anecdote there. So thanks, Leanne, for setting me up. So buy-in, we've kind of discussed buy-in quite a bit there. So I think, you know, moral duty, and then also if you can make it attractive to people is really good. So that kind of brings on to the next question I was going to ask. Like, so if you do encounter resistance to plain language as a culture, as a way of doing things, how would you approach that, Leanne?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing is really to create a sense of why do we need to do this and why do we need to do it now or very soon? Why can't we just say that sounds very nice, we might do it in a couple of years? So is it that this particular project you're working on has an audience that could really benefit from a plain language document? Is it that you're struggling to tap into particular groups and maybe this is a measure that could facilitate reaching out and engaging with those groups? Why does it need to be done now? And then I suppose it's that second step of forming your coalition, your guiding coalition, your champion. So getting, as Louise said, you mightn't be able to get sign off from the whole executive, but there might be one person who agrees with you. There might be one other champion. And I've experienced that in the past where we were looking to produce plain English and easy to read, which is documents with images, versions of a consultation paper. And the main, senior administrative decision maker was really like, this is going to take time. We don't have the money or the time for NALA to produce the documents for us. If we do them in-house, we're not going to, this is going to take resources, and just couldn't really see the benefits despite them having been illustrated. But then, I was able to get buy-in from someone who was a statutory appointee to the board of the organisation, and just getting that one person's approval really helped. And then I was very fortunate that I had a new manager appointed, and they're really delighted to have attracted this senior leader to the organisation. And they were saying, she's going to have her own ideas, and we're all going to have to respect that, highlighting to us that there is going to be some change. And I went, light bulb. So on her first week in the office, when I had my one-to-one with her, I said, plain language, it's brilliant. And this is why it would be so great for the organisation, and how it would help us to reach those groups with our consultation paper. By the end of the day, she was sending me videos and links, and she was so bought in. So when she went in to the meeting the following week, they had already tipped that she was going to have her own ideas. There was absolutely nothing that could be done. So it's just looking to who you can get to be your sponsor and be strategic about it, who's going to have influence. Even if it's one person, then you might get a second person. It doesn't need to be your line manager. It doesn't mean to be the whole executive. It can start with one or two people and snowball from there. And I think thirdly then is creating a vision for change, setting out what it would look like, what the output would be. Would it be a plain English pamphlet? Maybe get some examples from other bodies to highlight, how great this can be. Communicating that vision then as a step 4. Giving some, as I said, some examples from maybe other bodies in your sector and highlighting the benefits of it that other bodies might have experienced. And you can find a lot of resources online to help with that. And I think as a 5th step, then just removing obstacles and explaining to your organisation how it can be done. And that, say, bodies like NALA have resources on their website, they offer training. You can use the public sector toolkit that I mentioned earlier, and that Sean has since posted in the chat. And that there's software for easy to read versions of publications like photo symbols that are really low cost, and that actually, you can remove obstacles with resources that are already available. It doesn't mean that you need to invest a huge amount of money. And then I think a 6th step is creating short-term wins. So as Louise mentioned earlier, things like pilots. So we're not committing to this in the long run. We're just going to do this once for this smaller project. We're just going to produce this short document, this one leaflet, this one section of the website, and ensuring that you have a good dissemination plan so that short-term pilot will be successful. So publicising it well, making sure it gets to the right audience. And then I think as a 7th step, building on that change. So highlighting the wins, showing, say, an Irish Times article, showing that the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission sent out a tweet saying it was a really good example of compliance with the public sector duty. Senior executives love that kind of thing. highlighting how you reached more people, how you got more responses to your consultation, and then building on the change and introducing training for more staff, bringing on more champions. And then I think lastly, anchoring that change within the organisation. And that might mean introducing it into the organisation strategy, and saying, as part of our compliance with the public sector duty, we're going to publish a plain English summary of all of our consultation papers or reports, and identifying staff ambassadors and building a succession plan. So if we're plain English champions in our organisations and we're the main ones, we might not always work there. We might go to another organisation, we might retire, we might go on leave. So what's your succession plan? Who are your other champions? Who believes this, or who have come around to believe this as much as you? And will they be there to step into your shoes? Because especially in a big organisation, it can't all rest on one person. So building up your coalition and your champions as well.
Wow, Leanne, you're such a logical thinker that when you say 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, I really just want to like, oh, write them down, because they're really excellent. And I'm glad we're recording this because I'm going to go back and listen to that, so I'm going to learn a lot more. Yeah, and maybe you kind of covered this already. But like if you worked in an organization and you had, very few resources, or say you were that only that one person, and I think you've spelled out quite well there. But is there anything you'd like to say about that? If you an organization with few resources, where would you start?
Yeah, and I think that is really important, because even some public sector bodies, they might be small offices and they mightn't have a huge team or budget. And that has been the case for me. And it was the case that we didn't have the spare budget to pay for NALA to do the versions. But instead we used NALA resources. We used documents that had been produced by NALA in conjunction. There's even a legal terms document that has been produced in conjunction with one of the law firms that's really useful. We attended some NALA training. We had Sean in to do training with the organisation. But sometimes the NALA trainings can be booked up for quite a while. But there are seminars like this and others that Sean and colleagues offer, and there are other resources online that are really useful. And then there are things like the Department of Public Expenditure and National Development Plan Delivery and Reforms toolkit that Sean posted in the chat. Inclusion Ireland has some really good resources on its website for plain language and communicating with people with intellectual disabilities in particular. And I think one thing that organisations could do is to start to build a library of those resources. So it might just be a SharePoint shared folder where they might have resources, and then you might have another folder where sample documents of other NGOs, if you're an NGO, sample documents of other public sector bodies. So if you can see, how did the Department of Social Protection do that consultation paper? Oh, that was great. Yeah, we might borrow their phrasing there. We might set out our structure similarly. So keeping that library that you can always refer back to. And then I think when you've started to engage in plain language work, keeping a record of the lessons from your past plain English work, what worked well, what could have worked better. If you do engage an NALA editor like Claire O'Riordan, what's the key feedback that Claire gave us, and keeping a documented record of that, so that you don't make those same I wouldn't say mistakes, but that you don't do those same things again. You don't use that same language again, that you take on board Claire's feedback. And then making checklists maybe around that is something that we've done, that I introduced in the Law Reform Commission. So checklists for colleagues to just go through. Have I done this? Are all my sentences less than 20 words? Or have I used this font? Have I used this sizing? And so on. And then I think, as Louise mentioned, in her information about forced functions, is building templates, and that saves time as well for organisations that have a low budget. So I think Louise is in particular talking about those internal documents like minutes and so on. But for people who are interested in public-facing documents, you might have chunks of text that are regularly used in documents or on the web or on websites. So, for example, the About Us section of a document, or What We Do section of a document. And if you have that text in a template on a shared space where your colleagues can just lift it into a new document, that's going to save them time. It's also consistency. It means you're always describing the organisation in the same way and using the same language. And building a word bank as well was something we found really useful. So for things like proportionality or a warrant, or things if you're in the legal sector, and then if you're in the health sector, you might have other phrases as well, where you're trying to explain what a designated centre under the Health Act 2007 is, what do you normally say in plain language to communicate that? And if you have that word bank, then your colleagues can all go in and say, oh, what did we use when we wanted to talk about proportionality the last time? I see. And it saves time for your colleagues then, especially in an organisation where you might have lower resources or a smaller budget. And then I think attending all of these kind of NALA events is great. And software, like if you're looking to do easy to read documents with images to communicate a message, the photo symbols, it's a UK based software, but it is very low cost, and it's used by a lot of public bodies and NGOs. And there are things out there that will help you to write in a plain language fashion on a low budget.
Very, very good, Leanne. So I really the answer there was NALA resources, which I didn't plan, folks. I didn't plan for Leanne to just pitch NALA there for resources, but I'm glad she did. So that I put them in the chat, and there's so many interesting questions, folks, coming in the chat, and I'm trying to keep an eye on them as well. So yeah, I really like what you said about you just using templates to save time, because and looking at other organizations for examples. So like when I'm working with a client, I mean, I don't think it may be lazy, folks, but sometimes being lazy is smart. It's like, how have other people done this? You know, what can we learn from them? Okay, we're unique in Ireland in lots of ways, but like, how have Gov.uk done it? How have they done it in Australia? How have a similar organization to who I'm working with, how have they done it? And that'll, you know, it might save you time, might give you something to work with. You're not going to copy and paste it, but you're going to be inspired by it and look at how you can improve on it. So, you know, I think we all do that, don't we? And that's something to, it's good practice. What is best practice? How can we get that across? And if you're on, if you don't have many resources, that's a good thing to do. Yeah, so I've kind of covered a lot of the questions that I think we had. Maybe like, what do you see as future challenges? And the buzzword of the moment might come into this one, but what do you see as future challenges, Leanne?
Yeah, so I think future challenges, and one that we've been already seeing for years, is that there are less in-person services as more services move online. So less frontline staff in banks, and post offices and other services. And that's due to branch closures, reduced services as services move online. And so more people have to rely on textual or written instructions, usually on the internet, and they don't have someone there in the bank or the post office who they might have built up a relationship with, who can explain to them, this is what this means, this is what it means that your interest rate is going up, this is what it means that your your social welfare payment is increasing from next month or decreasing. And so that's a real challenge that we've been experiencing for years, but increasingly seeing more branches moving to cashless, where there aren't maybe physical human beings in the branch. It's just cash drop machines and things like that. And then I think a second challenge is plain English writing is difficult. It's hard. It can be hard for some people. And increasingly people want and need to get things done quickly, especially when more and more technology is being employed. There can be a pressure and expectation to get things done quickly, which leads me into the third challenge of artificial intelligence. So obviously we all want to try and employ technology, and we want to be innovative and we want to be resourceful. And maybe if you have a low budget, the temptation is to use artificial intelligence. And maybe at some point in the future, it will be really excellent in generating plain English documents. But we, when I worked in the Law Reform Commission, we trialled it earlier this year when we were trying to produce plain language versions of a very large report on a regulatory framework for adult safeguarding, and producing a plain language summary, executive summary, and a plain language version of the full 20 chapter report on developing this new legal framework. And we trialed artificial intelligence and put in entire chunks of text, so chapters or large portions of chapters. And our findings were that using the artificial intelligence bot didn't actually save time. So the text that was produced was confusing and not actually plain language. So sometimes the wording was actually more complicated. In many cases, it didn't capture the essence of the points being made, so the core information. And when you read the text, it was just really confusing and you weren't actually sure what the key points were. It didn't, even when you fed in a whole chapter within that chat at the same time, within that chapter, the plain English or supposedly plain language text produced didn't use consistent words for the same concept, which is really important in plain language. So it might switch between things like the Gardaí and the police. So it might use words that are used in other jurisdictions and wouldn't always say the guards or the police consistently. I could give loads more examples of where it would use inconsistent words for the same context. And then I suppose what is and might be a concern in different sectors, but particularly for lawyers, is that where we might be saying, trying to describe a situation in which it might be acceptable, necessary and proportionate to interfere with someone's rights. And if you were going to say that in a plain language way, you'd say, sometimes if a person is in serious danger and there are no other options to keep them safe, it might be okay for the Gardaí to enter their home if all other efforts have been made to keep them safe. But the plain language text, or supposedly plain language text produced by the artificial intelligence bot, would just say it's okay for the Gardaí to enter people's homes. And you're losing a lot of the nuance there, and lawyers in particular would be really stressed about that. But for people in the health sector, nuance and other sectors, nuance can be important and meaning as well. Also, we found that the artificial intelligence bot used a lot of Americanisms and language that just wouldn't be used in Ireland. So culturally, I suppose that was an issue, and people with I suppose with maybe would just find that really confusing. Especially, I would know that they are Americanisms, but some people might not. And we have to recognise that as well. And then also, it just sometimes used language which might be deemed insensitive in the particular context or in the Irish context. So, it might say things like people will just do this because they are vulnerable, and things that are just not acceptable to say. So I think that's a real future challenge to your question, Sean. And perhaps with artificial intelligence, we just need to wait to see if they ever become more advanced. But right now, I think it's a real risk to use artificial intelligence without human oversight and human editing. And in fact, for us, we found that from a time perspective, it was quicker to just produce the plain language drafts ourselves without using artificial intelligence. And this is not an ad for Nala.
Thank you, Leanne. Yeah, so folks, I'm gonna just thank Leanne for that wonderful, wonderful chats and conversation, and maybe we see some hearts for Leanne. That'd be good, or some thumbs up through the react button. That would be good. I'm not seeing any yet. I'm not moving on, folks, till I get some hearts. Thank you so much. There we go. Lovely. Yeah. So I'm gonna open up the question and answer, but I'm gonna maybe just that last question about AI, and Leanne has spoken very eloquently there about the experience she had with and then Louise, what's been your experience?
AI. So we've been piloting it for minute taking the last few months, and it's been really interesting. So started this about 2 or 3 months ago, and just as Leanne said, it was awful. It was muddled. It hallucinated. If you know that AI does that, it actually made up stuff that wasn't said in the meeting. So there was 101 things it did that was really bad. And I wrote quite a long LinkedIn post about it. And I said, oh, I don't think it's going to be taking our jobs anytime soon. But in the last week or so, I've had colleagues on the pilot get in touch with me and say something's happened, it's got better. And I've been looking at it and it's got better. It's terrifying. That's 2 or 3 months down the line. But what it's done now, somebody alerted me yesterday, is there was some AI notes from a committee meeting, and the AI had given opinions on how the participants had conducted themselves, and that sent shivers down my spine. So, for example, the chair had wanted to check the accuracy on something, and they said they used it by name, and they said she demonstrated very good governance by making sure that everything was above board or something. And I thought that was terrifying, because what does that mean? Is there some record about how good we are at our jobs or something like that? There's massive risks about all this information security. It's terrifying, but I'm not going to say that it's not going to become good, because the progress I've seen in 2-3 months has been astonishing. The difference.
That's really interesting, Louise. So like Louise mentions her blog there, and I follow her blog on LinkedIn. I think it's mostly on LinkedIn or other places, Louise, is it? Or
yes, on LinkedIn.
Yeah. So so I'll follow that, folks, pushing the pen, and there's so many interesting articles you can catch up on. So do check that out, and yeah. And in my experience, AI is so like I work as a trainer, folks. I work as an editor. So sometimes when I'm editing something, I'll just be stuck and I'll ask it like to help me with small little pieces, and that can help me a lot. I remember I was doing a training session with the Department of Environment, and I can't remember the exact wording, but it was like offshore geo landscapes. And I was like, what's that? And then I was like, islands, the coast, and it just kind of really brought it home. And this was in their executive summary. So, I could have done a lot of research and found out what it was, but I asked ChatGPT to help me, and it gave me a little bit of insights. So I would suggest using ChatGPT. Don't put any sensitive information into it ever, because it's, but if you have a question and you want an alternative, it can be really, really good. So yeah, if you're not using it, try using it and see how it works for you. So we've 4 minutes left, folks, and there's been so many interesting questions in the chat. And honestly, they're like questions such as, I'll go to this one here. I'll just read it out. Is there a list of links to the laws and regulations of public bodies to embed plain English? I might ask Leanne that, and then if there's not, maybe we should have one. But is there a list of links of laws and regulations of public bodies to embed plain English?
No, I don't think there is unless you have one on your website, Sean. But
Yeah.
in terms of there is, as I mentioned, the public sector duty, and that's in the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission Act 2014, which can be accessed on the online Irish Statute book. And then there is also duties in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which has been ratified by Ireland. And that can be accessed online both through the UN directly, but I think it will be available on other websites as well. And then the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Children, Rights of Children. And then there are more laws on accessibility generally. And I do think there is a list of them on the National Disability Authority's website, but they relate more to website accessibility and having an access officer's contact details on the website of the body and so on. But I know that those kind of more accessibility ones, not plain language specifically now, but they are available on the National Disability Authority's website.
Perfect. Thanks, Leanne. We'll dig that out about the NDA and accessibility and put that in the chat. And just about plain language and the law, Leanne has spoken very well there about international ones. Like we did get the government in their most recent program for government say that they would introduce a plain language requirement in all public service communication to be in plain language. That was from 2020. Now we're facing into another general election, so we're advocating for it again. And our two main, I hate saying the word asks because I've become a person who says asks, but our two main requests for the government are to like introduce that as into the culture of plain language, and then like use the ISO standard. So folks, there is an ISO standard, the International Organization for Standardization, to a voluntary plain English standards. And I think if you go onto the NALA Plain English Network on LinkedIn, there's a post about an upcoming webinar about introducing using the standard in your organization. I think Naja is here, who's going to be actually one of the people leading on it. So that's great. So yeah, there's lots of webinars out there, folks, and guides about introducing the plain language standards that's available now for your organization. So I'll share that with you after in the little resource pack. So maybe we do one more question, folks. Really, so just to end, I might just scroll through here. Dave, did you see a question that we could end things with, or let me see? Yeah. Well,
yeah. Sorry.
Go on.
Someone had asked about research documents in particular, I think.
Oh yeah, we better go back to that one because I said we'd come back. Thank you, Leanne. So do you want to, so research documents, Leanne, what would you?
Yeah, so I think that can be really complex, particularly when you're using a lot of academic literature, and it's really about the structure of the document. So your headings. So what is this document about? Bullet points. This is what it's about. What are the questions that we were trying to answer in this research, and listing them out, and then taking your first question and saying, there is very little research in Ireland about this. What does the research in the UK say? The research in the UK has found, and have your bullet points on this point. It's really about structure, breaking it down into topics, and using things like questions as headings can be really useful. What are the main points of agreement from all the studies? What are the gaps in the research? Is more research needed? Yes, we think that more research is needed on X and Y. Again, bullet points. But what are our main findings? Our main findings are A, B, C. What do we think should happen? And because of these main findings, we think that there should be a new system introduced in the HSE, or we think that there needs to be more funding for budgeting and advice services. What do the findings show? It's really about the structure of the document, using headings really, really well, not using not losing nuance, but not necessarily needing to put in a lot of the detail. You could say this was a large study with 1,000 people. This was a smaller study. So you're still acknowledging that there's a difference in methodology, and maybe not all research is created equal. But you're doing that in a very plain language way to highlight to people, this is, maybe this study has more weight because it consulted 5,000 people. So you can still do that. You can still highlight some studies are maybe wider, they're maybe more have more weight, or they have more authority, as we might say, in a less plain language way. But it's really about the structure of the document and how you lay it out, how you break it down into topics, and using kind of questions as headings as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Leanne. That was a really whirlwind tour. And what I'd say, folks, is the Law Reform Commission, like they really, when Leanne was working there and still do now, they really do kind of walk the walk. So if you take a look at, like, say, what was the most recent adult safeguarding, a regulatory structure for adult safeguarding, and if you see how they turned like 1,000-page like legal argument, legal precedent, history into like a plain language summary, and you'll see how they did it, and that kind of might show you the way a little bit. So I'd encourage you to check out a couple of the Law Reform Commission ones because they're really, really good. So folks, I'm going to just thank our speakers. Actually, I'm going to thank our speakers, but I'm going to ask Derv to turn on maybe do the slides, and then I'm going to do the outro. So if you can stick around for 2 minutes, folks, I'm going to just do the outro. But to thank so much to our speakers. Because this is the part where you have to listen to us try to push the merch. Okay. Yeah, so folks, if you like what we've talked about today, I really, really encourage you to check out Learn with Nala, which is our online learning platform. And we have lots of courses for professional development. So if you kind of feel activated today about like plain English and a little bit about literacy, please do check out our professional development section on Learn with Nala. And there's lots and lots of courses. I think the courses might be on the next slides. Derv? So there's courses about understanding adult literacy, become literacy friendly. There's one about cancer health literacy. There's one about, so those are our 3 main ones for professional development. If you want to understand literacy and where plain English comes into it, I'd really encourage you to check that out. It's free. It's really good. We have another event coming up. If you want to share this with any ETB people out there, adult educators, there's an event coming up on the 28th of September in the Gresham. Ooh, la la la. It's called The Importance of Your Vote. So that's for adult learners. So just spread the word about adult learners. Anyone who wants to, have a bit of talk about the importance of voting. So that's really good. It's coming up. And then in terms of plain language, so folks, this should have said this at the start, but this is part of a series of webinars where we have every month we have one webinar, and I'm just so delighted that we had 2 amazing guest speakers to kick it off. So our next kind of webinar will be up to creating and designing forms. So it's going to be a bit more workshoppy. So if that's a word, we've already had a couple of people send in samples that they're working on, and we're just going to, how can we use the plain English guidelines? How can we use the NALA resources to help us improve our communications? So there's one about, the next one is on the 11th of October. So please do come along or share the news with your colleagues or get in touch. Is there anything else there, Derv? Oh yeah, there's the Plain English Network. So folks, we're up to about 500 members in the Plain English Network. And so it's folks like yourselves, and it's just about like sharing resources, sharing news, sharing tips, sharing tools. Someone mentioned the Hemingway app there. So there is like a pinned link there to lots of resources. So I don't have a link tree, or we don't have a link tree, but we do have the NALA website, which has lots of resources. But I've built up like guides I think are good, or resources that I think are good. And where do you put them? Well, I put them there. So do check that out, folks. That's the NALA Plain English Network on LinkedIn, and then there's lots of resources there. So if someone asked a question about like where are links to good resources, well, it's going to put it in there if that is okay, and I'll put it in the follow-up email. And I think that might be it. Is it? Yeah, that's it, folks. We ran 5 minutes over, but sure, that's grand. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks to Derv, thanks to Louise, and thanks to Leanne, and wishing you all a good day and hope to see you again. Lovely. Perfect. So the number's going down. So yeah, okay. yeah, we'll just end things, folks. I think we'll just leave it. Thank you very much. Bye bye bye. See you soon.